Merry Christmas Eve. It is a day of celebration, but today I want to talk about one of the biggest problems in Hypixel Skyblock currently. So let's get into... What? There's a new fire sale? You heard my dog right. There's a fire sale going on literally right now in Hypixel Skyblock. The Aurora Reindeer, the Range Rate Griffin, the backpack skins out the wazoo, baby seal backpack. This is insane. And you know what a fire sale means? That means you can use code BANANA on the Hypixel store to save 5% on your gem purchases. You can also use this for ranks, boosters, literally anything on the store. You save 5% and you support the channel, which I use to buy my dog some epic treats. So definitely use code BANANA on the store. It's free, and it would be amazing if you do so. Where was I? The biggest problem in Hypixel Skyblock. I want to talk about Mage, Melee, and Archer because these are the ways that you damage things in the game, but the way that these things interact with everything in the game and the way that they scale varies vastly between the different classes, and I think that is a huge problem going forward. The class system is present in pretty much every area of Hypixel Skyblock at this point. Originally, when the game came out, there was obviously the difference where you could run Wise Armor or Superior Armor, but there wasn't really a huge distinction between a lot of the damage classes. Up until Dungeons, we really didn't see much, but since Dungeons came out, we've seen the 3 different damage types each show up in their own way, but that might be a problem. Every time that they add one of these new top tier items, it's costing like 1 billion coins to get into the setup, and sometimes they aren't even useful on different activities in the game. And when you look at the 1.0 threads that they've made overall, it really looks like they're going towards a build crafting style of Skyblock where you can play whatever you want, but it really doesn't make sense with how things progress right now. Let's look at Archer, for example. In Dungeons, it is great. Everyone runs an Archer in Dungeons because it does a lot of damage because the Archer class is phenomenal in there. Outside of Dungeons, however, Archer is a completely different story. The only thing that Archer really gets used on is bosses, and that is purely because it is able to get a lot of hits faster than other things would be able to get hits, and that's because of Duplex and Terminator shooting multiple arrows and Terror Armor, stuff like that. But when you're actually dealing damage to enemies and not hitting these damage caps, Archer is just terrible. And then there's the progression. Sure, there's a lot of bows in the game, but ever since short bows got added, there is pretty much only 3 viable bows at this point, and one of them got added like 2 months ago. There's the Dragon short bow, which is the early game one. There's the Juju bow, which is unlocked at Enderman 5 now, and then there is the Terminator, unlocked at Enderman 7. The difference between all of these bows is absurd, and the price difference matches that. The Terminator is costing nearly 1 billion coins if you're trying to get a max setup one, where you're running Duplex and all the stuff on it, and the Juju bow is not 1 billion coins. It's not even close to that, and it's not even close to as good. This leads to a huge skill gap in archers because if you don't have Terminator, you are not a good archer. No one's going to want to invite you to their dungeon party, and you're not going to be using bows on anything outside of dungeons because you literally can't on most mobs. As I said, on Kudra, on Dragons, it's viable because there's the damage cap, or it's not even checking damage numbers in the case of Kudra. But when you're looking at Slayers, you can use a bow on literally one of them, and it does basically 0 damage. People use a Duplex Terminator to do hits phase on Enderman. They don't use it for the damage at all. And when it comes to the other mobs in the game, it can't even do ghosts. You can't do ghosts with bow because they thought that'd be unfair. They just want you to have to melee ghosts, meaning that Archer is completely not viable and has terrible progression. Even on mobs it does work on, Archer is not that great because of how arrows work. For some reason, arrows bounce off of literally every mob you shoot at because they have immunity frames. So I'm going to shoot 3 arrows at this guy and 2 are going to come right back at me. You saw I did like 500,000 damage or something there whenever I crit with Terminator here. And you're going to see if I take out a sword and do the exact same setup, I'm going to deal double that damage because Archer is just terrible. Melee is actually in a pretty decent spot progression-wise. Every single dungeon floor pretty much has a new melee weapon that you can use, and if it doesn't, it probably adds a new armor set you can use, so you can progress pretty well with melee. But it's still not in an amazing spot where melee actually isn't dealing that much damage compared to mage, and any situation where you can use mage over melee, you should probably use mage. So it would be nice to see a buff a little bit to the viability of melee, or maybe a nerf to Mage. I don't really know, but you can see I'm dealing like 1 million damage with my current setup. I'm not using optimized stuff like at all, but it's like doing double Archer's damage, and there is decent progression. Even M7 is giving progression for swords where you can get a Dark Claymore. So swords are actually in a pretty decent spot, I can't lie. And then there's Mage. Mage is probably in the opposite position of Archer. It is too viable to the point where they nerf it where you literally can't use it, because I was dealing like 1 million damage with an unoptimized setup. I'm using a pretty optimized setup for Mage right now, and you're going to see one right click, 3.5 million damage on this enemy, and you can do that in a huge radius, and that is because Hyperion is very good. But without Hyperion, once again, Mage is in a really weird spot. They have been closing the gap since Hyperion came out, where they've added some other stuff. The Glacial Scythe is a nice later game Mage weapon, but it's still not even close to Hyperion. The gap between someone using a Glacial Scythe or using a Midas Staff or a Spirit Scepter versus that of a Mage using Hyperion, huge difference. And this problem has caused them to add magic resistance to most things in the game. Mage used to literally run dungeons, so they had to add magic resistance to a lot of enemies in there. They buffed the other classes where Archer was actually really good, adding Terminator and stuff, really changed up the meta in there. Nowadays, Mage is only used in dungeons for the left-click Mage feature on dragons, because it does actually do a decent amount of damage. But outside of dungeons, Mage is only viable in a couple spots, and in those spots, it is definitely the best option. On Slayers, it can be used on Tarantulas and on Endermen, and it literally just one-shots Tarantulas, and it is the fastest way to kill Endermen, but you can't use it on Revenants, you can't use it on Svens, you can't use it on Ghosts, you can't use it on a lot of different things in the game, because they do just add magic resistance because of how great Mage is. Hyperion has become so meta-defining that the scrolls keep jumping in price. The price of Hyperion has stuck around at like 1.5 billion at this point, because this weapon is so oppressive. It is so viable, and they just don't let you use Mage on anything because of it. So once again, huge skill gap. If you don't have a Hyperion, you're basically a nothing Mage, and if you do have a Hyperion, you nuke in spots you can, but you can't use it in a lot of locations. So looking at the three classes, you have Archer, which is good in one spot, but terrible everywhere else with terrible progression. You have Melee, which can be used everywhere in a decent way, but gets outclassed by Mage any opportunity Mage gets. And then there's Mage with bad progression and just a crazy amount of damage when you can do it, but they don't want you to do it because they think Mage is too good. The reason I'm bringing this all up is because they really seem to be promoting a build crafting style of play. They want you to be able to play Skyblock the way you want to play it. If you want to play Mage, they want you to be able to set yourself up for that. They're giving the Infernal Aurora armor where you can get this insane amount of mana regen, this different passive that's allowing you to do stuff with the Aurora Staff, which is a completely non-viable weapon, by the way. They're adding all of this stuff, but then they're not balancing the game around it, where they're just letting one thing be the best in one thing and completely useless in other areas of the game. I do think that the different classes should be a little more viable than others in certain situations. Like Mage should be the best at AoE clearing, Archer should be the best at doing stuff from range, but it shouldn't be a situation where if you're trying to join Kudra as a full melee player, you just get kicked, because that's what's happening right now. If you don't have a Hyperion and you try and get into Kudra, you're literally throwing, because it is just not viable in there. These setups are costing more and more every single update that they add, especially with the Infernal armor. If you go for something like Infernal Terror right now, you're spending hundreds of millions of coins per piece, not even including going for attributes. You're spending millions and millions just leveling it up, and it's going to be viable in what? 2 activities. It's going to be useful in dragons and in the Infernal Kudra part where you're shooting at Kudra. It's not even useful in the clear part because, once again, Mage is the best at that. So you're spending billions of coins on a setup, and they're not letting you use it in certain situations because it's either not good enough or they're not allowing you to do it. This is even more worrisome when you look at the 1.0 combat thread, where they talk about combat masteries. This is going to be a combat skill tree where you can select between melee, archer, and mage, and you can go and specialize within it towards a certain thing. If you want to be a more stealthy archer, you can do that. If you want to be a ranger, you can do that. If you want to be an AoE mage and nuke rooms, they want you to be able to specialize for that. But if they're having these systems where you have to put in time on a skill tree, you have to spend hours and hours to unlock these upgrades, and then you can't even use these upgrades in certain parts of the game, I really don't see the point in having the upgrades at all. The point that I'm getting to is they really need to rebalance combat in the game to where everything can be used on everything and they are around the same level of viability. Everything should at least be able to kill the bosses and the things that you're using it on. Some things can be better than others in certain situations, but for real, I don't get why you see archers doing like 600,000 damage out of dungeons and mages are dealing 3 million damage. Mages are absolutely one-shotting things and archers are doing nothing. I do believe they're going to do that and they're going to rebalance the game, but they better do that before the next big combat update, because if they don't, we're going to see a very weird period where you're seeing people get sets they don't really want. They're going to get an Infernal Aurora set because it is the most viable thing, and you're going to see archers dwindle away, you're going to see melee dwindle away, and mage is just going to rule the game unless they add magic resistance, and then mage will literally be useless as always because that's what they do. They just add magic resistance and call it a day. Let me know what you guys think down below about this. This is definitely an opinion video. It could be a controversial one. It could be a widely accepted one. I literally have no idea, but I don't get why they're adding these different paths that we can go down and not letting us use these paths in certain situations. It makes no sense. I want to use my 6 billion coin setup to kill slayers. I shouldn't be forced to run something else because you think it's too good. Just balance the game, Hypixel. Please and thank you. So that's going to be it. Merry Christmas. I hope you enjoyed the video. Hope it kept you informed on everything going on in Skyblock, and I will talk to you in the next video. Peace out.